Hey, welcome back. In this lesson, I would like to dive into a couple of differences between Magento and Shopware. So this is actually part of a bigger series. If you're a Magento developer, then hopefully I'm going to tell you a couple of things to compare Magento to Shopware and therefore that you have a better understanding of what Shopware is all about. And here the focus is actually to deal with product attributes. And maybe the wording of a product attribute is already a little bit wrong because actually an attribute is a wording used by Magento and not necessarily used by Shopware. So first of all, there's a huge difference between the terminology that we're actually going to discuss. So first, a little bit of an overview of what Magento is thinking about all of those product attributes. There's this differentiation between EAV attributes and extension attributes. So first of all, the EAV attributes, they belong to this mechanism of EAV, entity attribute value, with all of the attribute definitions stored in a separate table called EAV attributes. And that's just not the entire story, because if you know about product attributes specifically, there's other tables involved as well, but that's a little bit beyond the point. Product EAV attributes are stored into attribute sets. So often you first need to create an attribute set and then actually create that attribute on its own. There's this differentiation between core and custom or third-party EAV attributes. So personally, I don't really believe between that difference, but following the architecture of Magento, that difference is kind of important. And why? Well, that's obvious, because then the core attributes are something that the core could rely upon, things like SKU or maybe even a manufacturer. But then actually there's also these custom EAV attributes, and coming to think of it, actually a manufacturer would be a custom EAV attribute. And for products, those custom attributes are also something that you can manage from within the backend, because there's a product attribute management. However, we're now talking about products, but also it's noteworthy to say that attributes also make up the architecture of customers or categories and a couple of other entities out there as well. Now, attributes for products are also managed by a product type. So there's a huge difference between the attributes between a configurable product and a simple product, or the difference between a simple product and a downloadable product is also boiling down to attributes. And that also leads into further configurations of those attributes on its own. For instance, you can mark a specific attribute as configurable, so that a configurable product is picking up on those attributes to do its calculation, shaping a matrix of simple products that lead into the configurable options. So that's the EAV bit. Then there's also the extension attribute bit. And while EAV attributes are managed kind of like through the database, extension attributes are actually really managed through code. And that starts with a little XML file, the extension attributes.xml file. And there you can either define it by using a simple approach or a more complex approach. So often I also refer to a simple extension attribute as being a simple value, a string, a boolean, and etc. While a complex extension attribute could also refer to a separate class that is then brought into the product entity itself. And that's leading into the follow-up also, how to put those extension attributes to use. Well, by attaching them to a repository, by intercepting all of the methods of that repository, and you do so by using a plugin, dependency injection plugin, before, after, around, and etc. So hopefully this is shaping up the thing that you already know, because that's actually the goal, that you know about Magento and its ways of dealing with attributes. And now let's see actually the other side, what Shopware is doing. Well, within Shopware, the picture is totally different, and that's kind of like the first approach. I'm now referring to product fields, and I think actually technically that would not be totally correct, but it allows for certain division of four, and let's actually go through all four just to have an understanding of how Shopware is creating like a modularity of product fields. So first of all, fields might be referring to the core columns in the table product. It's actually a little bit more complex than that, because there's not only the table product, but there's also product translations and product, well, whatever. And that's actually leading into a more complex story of so-called associations. You can create your own class on top of the original product entity, and then actually the product entity might be associating with that new entity as well. And actually the thing that I'm then talking about is nearly the same as a so-called entity extension, but actually an entity extension is a little bit simpler. But let's take a look at the entity extension in a bit. But basically there's this other thing that doesn't really shape up the product on its own, but it's still allowing for you to associate product data with other data. So it's kind of like a join, but then on a PHP level, and that's called an association. Now, the first group here is just the bare bones core approach, that there's this table product. It's not an EAV structure, it's just a flat table. And within that flat table, we have columns. So that's shaping up the possibilities of a product, like a product number, a product ID, obviously, a title, and a couple of other things. And then there's still the translation bit to take into account, but it's database based. Now, on top of it, we can also add something called product properties. And product properties are kind of like similar to the EAV attributes of Magento, if they are marked as a configurable attribute. And why? Well, because these product properties are basically picked up as configuration options in so-called product variants. And a product variant kind of like allows you to build something that resembles in Magento, bundled products, group products, configurable products, and etc. So these are options that become selectable by the customer in the storefront, and taking into account those properties that are then becoming part of the order as well. Those properties are stored in separate tables, property group option, but that's kind of like beyond the point. The third type is custom fields, and that's kind of like comparable with the product attribute management that you know about the Magento backend. So as soon as you go into the shopware administration, you can just add custom fields on top of a specific entity like a product. They're stored in a separate database table, custom field. But again, there's a couple of other database fields involved here as well. And it's kind of like an extensible way of adding new fields or new columns on top of that existing product entity without modifying the core, without modifying the database structure. So consider actually these custom fields as closely related to EAV attributes in Magento. Now, on top of it, there's also this entity extension. And actually, if you compare entity extensions with extension attributes in Magento, then you're spot on. The main difference between custom fields and entity extensions is that custom fields are managed in the database and entity extensions are managed through the code. And how to do that? Well, you come up with a new service, aka a class. An entity extension class, you tag it in a specific way. You also need to extend upon the right parent class and implement the right methods. So it's a little bit more cumbersome than what you see right here. But basically it's a service that you tag in a certain way. But then that extension still needs to be added on top of the original entity as well. And that's what you normally do by using an event subscriber or event listener. And then you can hook into the product method, add extension, and then the rest of the thing should work. And still from within an entity extension, the data is of course something that you can retrieve from the database. But I'm mentioning that the difference between the custom fields and the entity extensions is that the custom fields is based upon the database because the definition of those fields is originating in the database, while the entity extension definition is originating in the core code, or in code. So that's kind of like summing up how you make this product more extensible. So actually, because of all of those other options, the properties, the fields, and the entity extensions do not add a new column to the table product. That would be editing the core, which is always a bad idea. And in general, you could say that custom fields are, well, quite easy to work with, and as soon as you get started with them, there's a direct result. But if you want to add more PHP logic on top of it, then these entity extensions are quite powerful. Now, that's kind of like the comparison between the Shopware 6 product extensibility and the Magento 2 product extensibility. And I've been referring to products all of the time, but actually there's kind of like a hidden secret here as well. That as soon as you know that a product is extensible, it basically counts for any kind of other entity as well. And that's kind of true for Magento as well, as long as that entity in Magento is also an EAV entity. And in Magento, the database once started with most of the things being an EAV entity, but then somewhere back in the days of Magento 1.4 or something, the sales invoices and the sales orders, they changed from being an EAV entity into a flat entity. And in that move, suddenly you see that certain entities in Magento are less extensible, and that the power of extension attributes doesn't apply to everything that there is in the Magento system. Well, comparing that with Shopware, if you take a look at the database structure of Shopware, you could say that about 80% of all of the database tables are corresponding with real entities. And all of those entities are extensible by using entity extensions. And most, or no, well, not most, but the most important of them are also extensible by using custom fields. So from my perspective, actually, the Shopware architecture is making more use of this principle of entities, and therefore it leads also into more flexibility of extending upon them. Well, I'm not going to say that the one is better than the other one. I simply wanted to do a comparison, and at least now you've seen a little bit like how to compare the Magento EAV attributes more or less to custom fields and those properties. And likewise, the extension attributes are kind of like resembling the entity extensions. A lot of times the way to put this into action is totally different. So bottom line, you need to have the mindset of Shopware to get started with all of this. But knowing that the one kind of like resembles the other one is nice to know, and was also actually the purpose of this entire lesson. So hopefully that gave you a little bit of a glimpse of what Shopware could mean for you. If you're interested, well, keep on watching because there's more to come. Hope to see you in a bit.